You're listening to Out of the Box with Rosie Tran. Please subscribe to us on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. And if you enjoy us, you can always click the donate button on outoftheboxpodcast.com and send us some funds to help us keep going on. I'm here today with Jake Desyllas, the owner of the Voluntary Life website and also has a podcast, The Voluntary Life. Jake, how are you?
I'm really well. Thanks, Rosie. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
I am so excited to have you because you discuss quite a bit about the topic of getting out of the rat race, which I am a huge advocate of. And I love your website and your podcast. It's great.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I wanted to intro you to my fan base and have you talk a little bit about your ideas about getting out of the rat race and kind of intro your thoughts. And hopefully we'll be able to get some people opening their minds.
Sure. Well, I can tell you sort of my experience and what quitting the rat race means to me, if that's helpful.
Okay.
I mean, so my background is that I was an entrepreneur and I started a business and I really found that to be an amazing experience of freedom, having the opportunity to really work on stuff that I believed in and to, decide for myself how to take the business forward, and had a fantastic time. And I ended up selling my business. And that was an opportunity for me to then go on and work on other things as well, and decide, really to work on whatever I felt passionate about. And so I started doing the podcast, The Voluntary Life, because I found my own freedom through this route of entrepreneurship. But through the podcast, I got to meet lots of other people who have found ways to quit the rat race that are different to mine. And I guess that sort of, is something that I've learned a huge amount about, other ways to quit the rat race. And it's something that I'm really passionate about myself. And I think, we have a huge amount of conditioning in school and at home to just go into jobs and to kind of spend a lifetime in jobs. And there are so many other ways to find fulfillment. And that's really what quitting the rat race is about for me. It's about working on stuff that you truly believe in and living the kind of life that you get to decide for yourself. And so, that's what I'm really interested in.
Well, I completely agree with you 100%. I believe that the current higher education system is just training people to become indentured servants in a way, because people are just working to pay off student loans. Right now we have the highest student loan debt in the U.S. than we've ever had in history. And people are just becoming slaves and chained to their jobs. I wanted to find the rat race, or your definition of the rat race, for people who are listening. They're like, what is he talking about?
Well, for me, I see the rat race as the feeling of having to work in stuff that you don't want to do, and especially having to work in order to keep up with your lifestyle that goes with the job. That a lot of people feel that they have to keep working, as you say, to pay off debts they've already accumulated in studying in order to get the job that they're now working to pay off the debts for. It's like a crazy vicious circle. And so that for me is the rat race. It's especially the thing that I'm most interested in is the aspect of financial freedom, because even people who have a relatively sort of high consumption lifestyle, where maybe they have a nice car and they go out and have nice meals and do nice things, there's still many people living that life do not feel at all free, because they have huge debts to pay off, huge expenses. And it's like that's a rat race, keeping up with those payments. Whereas, if you are able to get to a position where you can work on stuff that you want to, because you don't have to pay off debts, and you've created a level of financial freedom for yourself, even if that's not at a very high level of expenditure. For me, that's a much greater feeling of freedom.
I I couldn't agree more. You're preaching to the choir. I'm on the path. I am not out yet, so I'm kind of jealous of you. But me and my husband are on the path out. And I just wanted to speak and address to something that you said that was really important. Because a lot of people, I think that getting out of the rat race means being a multimillionaire, living the high lifestyle, and not having to work. And I just wanted to give an example of a friend of mine who I know, who is a stockbroker. And he makes over $500,000 a year, which sounds like a great amount. And if he applied his salary to kind of, and we'll discuss the techniques that you, the 4 different techniques that you kind of talk about on your website, but he could be completely financially free within a couple of years. But he has a $2 million mortgage. He has a car that he's leasing that he can't afford. And so even though he's making over $500,000 a year, he is as trapped in the rat race as anyone else. Yeah,
absolutely. That's really typical. There's lots of people living that life.
So I think it's important to reiterate that it's not about how much money you're bringing in. It's about that change of the mentality, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what really counts for freedom for me is the knowing that you don't have to do stuff that you don't want to do. And if you can sort of get into that mindset, then you don't need a high consumption lifestyle. I mean, that stuff just feels more like a drag because you know how much it costs you in terms of freedom compared to the opportunity to really live and fulfill your own purpose.
And it's just stuff. I mean, this poor guy, he's a good friend of mine. He is paying, I think, over $2,000 a month in storage units just to store all of his crap.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That's just crazy to me. You know, when he tells me about these things, because he'll call me and he'll complain about it. And I just, and then I'll give him kind of advice or say, well, why don't you, because me and my husband live a very simple lifestyle. We're not flashy at all. We kind of live in a simple 1-bedroom apartment, and we're not, filthy rich, but we do have some means, and we're focusing our energy on saving the money and trying to do rental properties and other things to get out of the rat race and get residual income. And he's just like, well, I don't know how you guys do it. And then he'll complain about paying $2,000 a month for these rental units to hold the crap.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's so easy to do. We're living in Mexico at the moment, and we've been here.
Is that you and your partner? Or
yeah,
your
me
spouse?
And my fiance. Yeah, that's
okay,
right.
Great.
And we were here last year as well, last winter. And before we left, we put all our stuff in storage, just like your friend. And we rented out.
So what do you mean left? Where were you guys living?
We're from the UK, so we live in. When we're in the UK, we live in a town called Brighton, which is on the south coast of the UK. And before we left the UK, we put all our stuff in storage. And it was a huge hassle. It was kind of stressful because, we had to get everything ready and make sure that it was all stored and everything. And then we were away for 7.5 months, and I realized that I didn't need any of that stuff.
You didn't miss it at all.
I didn't miss it, no. And in fact, the feeling and coming back to it was more like, oh, God, I'm going to unpack all this stuff, work out, where it all goes again. And so over the summer, I actually just went minimalist, and I just got rid of as much as I could. And it felt like a huge weight off my shoulders, actually. So, yeah, I know exactly what it feels like to accumulate stuff. And making the choice to just get rid of as much as possible actually has, for me, been a real bonus. I mean, obviously, you can make a little bit of money on eBay selling off stuff that you have. But even just beyond the financial side of getting rid of the stuff, it's just so good not to have to worry about it.
Well, they actually say that your domain or the amount of stuff you have is a reflection of, it's a projection of your psychology. So people that are pack rats and kind of have a lot of junk, it's proven that they also have a lot of psychological baggage.
Yeah.
That they're associating with that, memories and emotional things and things that they can't let go of. And I had a similar experience. When I moved in with my now husband, we were engaged. And I grew up, my mom is kind of a mild hoarder. She's not crazy like on, I don't know if they have the TV show in the UK, but they have a show in the US called Hoarders.
Right.
Where people just amass massive amounts of junk. And my mom, she's like a mild version of that. And she has a lot of emotional baggage, which I kind of saw, with that. And so I kind of grew up learning to put emotional connections on junk. And when my fiance, now husband, moved in with me, he kind of helped me clean out the stuff. And I felt, like you said, very liberating getting rid of it. I was like, why am I so attached to it? And once I let go emotionally and mentally and physically of the stuff, I just felt so much lighter.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just junk, people.
Get rid of it all. I thoroughly recommend it.
Get rid of it all. Have a simple lifestyle. And you know what? There's this fear, I think, especially people my mother's generation and a lot of World War II people, in scarcity and the Depression era, of there's not going to be enough. But, if you live in a developed nation and you're not in a third world country, you can always get it. You can always find it somewhere else. It's not going to be... I can understand if you're in a third world country or a developing country, but if you're in a developed country, you can always find it again. You can always get another skirt or another shirt or another vase or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think my situation was definitely there was a psychological aspect too, because for many years I focused on building a business, and really to the detriment of my personal life. I was really involved in work, and that's when I accumulated a lot of stuff. I went on a skiing holiday, so then I had a bunch of skiing stuff, and that just sort of sat in a cupboard for years, with me going skiing once every, I don't know, however many years, and that stuff just all sort of accumulated. And when I had the chance after selling my business to sort of have a psychological change of sort of direction and reassessment about my life, I was able to let go of a lot of that stuff too. So I think you're right. I think there is a psychological aspect to it.
There is. There's. I hate to be cliche, but there's always something underneath. And I know, and it's funny because sometimes people get really defensive, if you try to help them. I know on the show Hoarders, but also in real life, because like I said, my mom is kind of very attached to stuff. And when me and my sisters try to help her clean up, she gets very defensive about stuff. And it's, whenever someone gets defensive about something, it means that they absolutely need to face it and address it, because there's something there and there's something underneath. And a lot of times people say, oh, well, there's nothing underneath. I just, it's like an alcoholic. Oh, well, there's nothing underneath. I just like to drink. Well, no one just likes to drink to the point of destroying their lives. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of interesting how we project our inner world onto our outer world. And, I think especially, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in America, there's this obsession with buying things, and obviously it's a capitalistic society. So I think a lot of people also attach an identity to stuff. Like, this is proof that I'm successful, that I have all this junk.
Yeah.
Or this is proof that they're very concerned about judgments, because let's use my friend for an example. He's making so much money and he's just spending money like crazy. And meanwhile, on the other hand, I don't make that much money, but I'm probably percentages wise, I'm closer to getting out of the rat race than he is, even though he's making, I would say, probably 10 to 20 times as much money as I'm making.
Yeah.
So it's very important. So I love that you focus on minimizing and simplification of lifestyle as one of the ways. But I want to talk about all your different ways that you found by interviewing people on the Voluntary Life. Yeah,
sure. Well, so... all of the interviews that I've done have sort of introduced me and listeners to different people sort of taking different approaches. But I think you can really summarize them in just 4 ways, and they're not exclusive. You can use strategies from each of these 4 ways together and combine them in a way that works for you individually. But it seems to me that there's sort of 4 basic approaches. And so the approaches are essentially, one is often called unjobbing, and then there's extreme saving, and then there's selling a business, and there's passive income. So I can just sort of give a very brief description of each, if you like.
Okay, great.
So the unjobbing route is basically to say, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to only work on stuff that I love, even if that means that I have to sort of essentially really lower my income massively. Because the problem is that a lot of people are interested in and feel passionate about things that are not big money makers. And the unjobbing route is a little bit different to the others, because it's basically the idea is not so much to get to a point where you don't have to work, but to choose work that for you doesn't really feel like work, right? Because you love it so much that you would do it anyway.
So you're getting out of the rat race by nature of not having a race, not having it be a rat race.
Exactly.
You're working, but it's just stuff that you really, really enjoy. So it's kind of like that, what's the phrase? It's like works in that something you love, so you never feel like you work a day in your life type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in order to do it, you normally have to be willing to live very frugally. Unless you're lucky enough to be passionate about something that is also earns you a huge amount of money. People who are unjobbing tend to live very frugally, and they tend to also maybe have multiple ways of making money, have a little side income projects and things that they do, and work on multiple things that they really enjoy doing. You don't tend to have that longer term financial security of knowing that you can stop working every day if you go the unjobbing route, but you just effectively kind of step out of the rat race by deciding not to go in for the sort of high consumption lifestyle. So that's sort of one route. And some people do that and are very, very happy doing it. And I think it's a valid option to choose. But another one of the routes that is a very interesting one is people who are involved in intensive saving or extreme saving. And this is where you are saving like more than 50%, typically more than 75% of your income. And that is a kind of really sort of clear lifestyle choice to massively focus on getting to financial freedom as fast as you can. So there are whole communities of people who kind of focus on doing this and are really using savings to get to retirement within a much shorter period. So like, for example, if you save about 50% of your income, you can probably retire in about 16 years, assuming about 5% interest after inflation. And it depends obviously on sort of what you're able to get in your investments. But if you save 75% of your income, you might be able to retire in 7 years. So those are the kinds of that's the kind of choice that some people are pursuing.
Now, I think that this is what me and my husband are doing, which is very similar to extreme savings. And this is a suggestion I'm just making to my listeners. So we don't do 50% of our personal income per se, but what we do is we're a two-worker household, and my husband works, and all of his money goes towards our expenses and bills, and then 100% of my income goes towards investing and saving. And we do this by living very, very frugally as well. And I actually feel kind of like super proud of myself and really great about it. Like I don't miss all of the shopping. I don't miss it's a different way of thinking because you kind of have to detach from the brainwashing of like the corporate media.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a lot of brainwashing. It's kind of like living a really unhealthy lifestyle and then getting super healthy and then noticing all the burger ads all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like being surrounded by smokers when you've given up.
And you quit smoking. Yeah. It's exactly like that. And so it was kind of hard when we first started doing that, but now we're so adjusted to living off of the one income that it's not even a big deal. We just don't, and we still have a pretty awesome life. Like I cook quite a bit and I took up cooking even more because one of the main expenses that we noticed was going out to eat. And so now I'm like this great cook and I've learned all these fun recipes and I kind of prefer cooking because sometimes we'll go out to eat at a restaurant and I've taken so much pride in my cooking that I feel like we're wasting money by going to a restaurant because I'm like, oh, I could have made this at home.
Right, yeah.
And anytime I go to a restaurant where I really, really like the food, I'll go home and research how to make it online and then I'll like be really proud of myself for having made it. So I think that there's other ways to cut expenses and I think it's really, really possible for people to live off of one income in a two-worker house if they kind of assess where they're spending their money, because I found that we were spending a lot of money in nonsensical places.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, totally. And one of the key things that a lot of people say about this approach, the intensive saving approach, is that it's always easier to save more by cutting your expenses than it is by increasing your income, because that's like the easy gains come from lowering your expenses. And so the more frugal you can live, then the more you can put away in savings. Because as you earn more, then you have to look at potentially paying more tax and have to there's other things that sort of kick in there. So one of the easiest ways to increase your savings is just to live more frugally. And it's definitely a great opportunity. But as you said, Rosie, I think one of the important things is to find meaning in it. For people, if this is going to be something that people are just going to find a major inconvenience and a major hassle, and that it's going to make them miserable, then it's not going to work. They're not going to enjoy their life in doing that. But if you can find meaning in getting more financial freedom, then you can actually take real satisfaction in knowing that this gets you closer to living more free, which is sort of, if that's a core value for you, then it's not a huge inconvenience, and it's not something that sort of is going to be, missing out on life. It's actually getting you closer to living really your true purpose.
It is. And like I said, for me, I get extreme passion out of cooking at home. I'm cooking healthier meals. And I also have that feeling of, hey, the money I'm saving is going towards my financial freedom.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for the listeners who are wondering how you can cut expenses, it's so easy. You just print out, your monthly statements, look at your checkbook, and just notice how many times you go out for unnecessary coffees or going to Starbucks, going to Coffee Bean, spending $5, $6 on a coffee, which is absolutely ridiculous. And it's the price you're paying for your financial freedom.
Yeah.
So there's so many ways you can cut coffee trips. Even fast food adds up. If you think, oh, well, I'm only paying $5, I'm only paying $10 for this, meal. One, it's hurtful to the environment because there's so much plastic and paper products being used in fast food. And two, it only takes me, Jake, about an extra half an hour a week to go to the grocery store, which I was doing originally anyway, but plan out my meals and look up things online. And a lot of people think that cooking is just this elaborate thing that takes hours and hours and hours, but thank God for the internet. You can Google quick, simple, fast recipes and save. I heard of a family online who saved over $1,200 a month by switching from a couple meals a week down to just cooking at home and planning, lunches. And, maybe you won't be that popular at the office. You'll have your little sandwich brown bag lunch.
But you can find communities online of people who share your values and who share your interests, and there are people out there who are really into this and have loads and loads of suggestions that they share with each other as well. So
do you know what is? Do you have a forum on Voluntary Life? Are there websites that you know of that you can recommend to the listeners?
Two of them. So I don't know about this like in massive detail, but two that I know that are very entertaining and very fun. One is a guy called Mr. Money Mustache. He's a blogger, and he runs a blog all about intensive saving. And so you can look on his forums and see lots of people who are sharing their ideas there. And there's another guy who's called Jacob Lundfisher, I think, and his website is called Early Retirement Extreme. So I would suggest for people who are interested, have a look into those two communities. There's lots of people there sharing tips and so forth.
And I also want to say, when you say retirement, you don't necessarily mean sitting on your butt watching TV. Yeah. You're just saying not working a typical 9-to-5
the idea
rat race job.
Exactly. The idea being not that you just eat bonbons all day, but that you do whatever you want, right? I mean, that's the key is like, if you want to work, if you want to start another business or do whatever, great. If you want to do things... I mean, some of the things that I've been involved in since I sold my business is I've been involved. I was in a band and did lots of gigs, and I've done.
What were you playing?
Guitar.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I did some improv comedy, and I've done a lot of travel with my fiance. So, but I've also done writing, and I've got a book coming out, and so it depends what you want to do. But yeah, absolutely, a retirement is not. I mean, we have this image of retirement which is about people playing golf in their sort of 60s and 70s. But the thing about the idea is to gain freedom to do whatever you want. And that can be as active and it can be as value generating as you want it to be.
I know a lot of people who say, well, if I wasn't working, I don't know what I would do. And I think those are exactly the type of people who need to spend some time alone, because you need to know what your life purpose is beyond typing on a computer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think personal development and self-exploration are extremely important. And I think that a lot of people do not engage in this because they're so busy just running around on a treadmill on the little hamster wheel that they don't realize that there's so much untapped potential inside each one of us that, you know, you could be making a difference in your community. You could be, like you said, just enjoying exploring and learning new things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, you know, I don't know what your religious background is, or, you know, any of my listeners, but even if you don't think that there's, you know, a heaven or hell or whatever, the one fact that we do know until we pass away is that we have this life, and that's what we have right now. So why not make the best of it and enjoy it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm an atheist, but I actually, you know, I see this as being the opportunity to really live your true purpose. And I think the fact that we're going to die is actually a real positive motivation to get on with living, you know, and actually really take advantage of this amazing opportunity that we have in being alive. So yeah, I think unfortunately it's very easy to numb yourself out to that and to imagine that you'll just find some time in the future to really live and do epic things. But you know, the future is going to run out, and so we absolutely got to make the most of it.
Yes, I totally agree. Okay, so we have two more techniques that you found. Let's get into them.
Yeah. So one of them is passive income. And this is really, you mentioned, Rosie, looking at, I think you said rental properties or other things. I don't recall exactly, but a lot of people look at opportunities for having a business that will bring in passive income. So the idea is you do work up front. Maybe it's an online business and you're selling digital products, or otherwise maybe it's a property that you purchase and renovate and then get rental income from. But the idea is you put in the work up front, and then you have a business that generates income and you live off that income. And it's passive in the sense that you shouldn't really have to do a huge amount of work to keep it going. You may need to do a little bit of maintenance, but the idea is to have either one or a number of businesses that give you income, that gives you the freedom to then choose whatever you want to do with your time.
And just as a side note, I think I mentioned this in episode 2 of the podcast, but I just want to tell the listeners again that how possible it really is. My uncle, who was making $20,000 a year as a city worker, is now a multimillionaire with over 100 rental properties because he was focused. And he did a similar thing where I think, I'm not sure if my aunt was working or he was working, and the other one was just pouring that money into foreclosed properties, and they were fixing them up. And now, you know, again, my uncle is an immigrant. He barely speaks any English. And on $20,000 a year now is a multimillionaire with over 100 properties. So to say he was in a cheaper market, a smaller market, you know, obviously properties are going to be a little bit more expensive in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, bigger cities. He was in a smaller city where property values were a lot lower. But once you get 2 or 3 or 4 properties, the rental income from those other properties kind of snowball, and it turns into a giant snowball of passive income.
Yeah, and I mean, historically, it's always been property that's been the thing that people have looked at, and it's still an opportunity for people to get passive income. The other thing that I would just mention, though, is to have an online business, because that's really, you know, the sort of the huge growth in passive income in recent years has been from people who've been able to set up businesses selling online and having digital products that they can sell and get repeat revenue from. And it's a great opportunity, especially if you want to be more location independent and want to have the opportunity to travel. And, you know, then you can even take advantage of living in a lower cost place as well. You know, there's lots of people who we meet on our travels here in Mexico and other places who have online businesses, and they have chosen to put themselves somewhere where they can live a nice life, but on much cheaper than they would, you know, be in the States or in Europe. So I think what you say about property is great. And I would just mention, though, that also this is the great opportunity of our times is to look at having an online business. And there's
that
lots.
is great. And I actually have an online business as well, selling stuff. But I want to know about what type of businesses you've heard of as well online.
Well, I mean, so a lot of people, for example, my partner runs a business online, and she has a personal development website. So she is...
Do you want to plug her website?
Yeah, it's becomingwhoyouare.net.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so she, for example, we're living in Mexico, and she sells ebooks, and she sells e-courses, and she does coaching. And the coaching is all done through Skype. So,
and is it all published books that she's written?
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
yeah. And they're on Amazon. She sells them through Amazon, and also has audio books on her site, and e-courses where people sign up and then they can go through like a personal development course online with emails and worksheets and so forth. So that's an example of taking something that she's passionate about, personal development and psychology, and creating a business out of it. And whatever your passion is, whoever's listening, whatever you're interested in, you can look at what's out there and what have people done in this field. Whatever you're interested in, if you have knowledge to share and if you're really passionate about it, there's always an opportunity for you to find a niche. And so, I think it's a great way. And there's lots of people who talk about ways of doing this. Smart Passive Income is a podcast that is all about techniques for doing this, that people might want to look at and hear more about.
And even if you're kind of shy, like you don't know what to do, I started with just an eBay store, selling stuff. I know a lot of women, it's very women popular, but there's Etsy, where a lot of women sell things that they're, making wreaths or,
right,
homemade clothes or whatever. As long as you have something out there, you can get some income just to start. If you're a little bit kind of scared to jump in and maybe start a website or start a store, you can just use eBay or Amazon or other things just to get your foot in the door.
Absolutely.
There's so many websites, and the great thing about the internet is you're reaching millions and millions upon billions actually of people, not just if you were selling, products just from your house or from the back of your car or something.
Yeah, totally. So the last one I was just going to mention, the last way of quitting the rat race is the way that I chose, which is to found a business, to grow a business, and then to sell it. And so that's sort of the entrepreneurial route. And if you have a passive income, then the idea is that you're building up a website that you're going to continue taking revenue from, or taking income from for years to come. But the other route is to build up a business to a point where you have a profitable business that has value, and then you basically sell that business either through a trade sale, or potentially you can sell some equity in it. You can maybe even look to float it on the stock exchange, depending on what the scale of the business is. I sold my business through a trade sale, which is by far probably, I think, the easiest way to do it. And that gives you the opportunity to take that lump sum from the sale and then use that to basically live from the investments in a similar way that you would if you were to build up your savings slowly through the kind of extreme saving route. This is more creating something that generates value that you can then sell. And that's really the entrepreneurial route. And I think it's so much easier now to be an entrepreneur than it has been in the past, even though we have crazy red tape and regulations. All of the technology that's available now to help you in being an entrepreneur. As you said, Rosie, the opportunity to reach people through the internet, but also the opportunity to have really good transparency about what's going on in your business, to get really good, easy accounting, to know how you're doing and get really fast feedback on how things are going. It's so much easier now, and I think it's a fantastic experience. It totally changed my life, and I think it's a great thing to do if you can.
Well, not just that, but the loads of free and cheap information available through the internet. If you want to start a certain type of business, you can Google it, and there's 20,000 websites of how-tos or someone else who has done it. Or even if it's not your specific business, there's websites on how people have sold businesses. There's websites on how to start a small business. I mean, if before this information was not guarded, but you had to know extremely wealthy people, you had to know entrepreneurs, now there's it's like info for hire online.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So really there is no excuse if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah.
And there's also, like you said, support groups and forums and like-minded thinkers online. Yeah,
I mean, there's masses of stuff out there to support entrepreneurs. And the one thing I would say about it is that, I do think, in my experience, that there's a lot of conditioning about going into being an employee that you sort of have to break through. And you've got to, find a way to actually kind of go against the grain in becoming an entrepreneur.
That is a really, really good point. And I think conditioning is a nice way of putting it. I consider it brainwashing because I really feel like our current society is just pushing people to become indentured servants. It's not. There are a lot of alternative thinkers out there saying become your own boss, become your own entrepreneur, and it's now emerging even larger with the internet and other, new thinking. But still, a lot of people are just brainwashed. Go to school, get a job, buy a house, get into debt, XYZ, do this, do that. And there is so much fear of straying from the main path.
Yeah. And if you think about it, every single one of your teachers in school was an employee. So
exactly.
It's no wonder.
They're teaching you to do what they did.
They're teaching you to live like an employee. If you ask them, what's the key to a good life, they're going to say you need to get a good education and then you need to get a good job, because that's basically the lifestyle that they led. And we've all had over a decade of that message every day from employee after employee teacher. Can you imagine what it would have been like if all of our teachers were working entrepreneurs, and if we had spent as kids more than 10 years every single day just being amongst entrepreneurs doing their thing? We would think totally differently. And so, but we've been trained and conditioned by people who are really in that employee mindset and that employee lifestyle. So you have to break through that and realize that that mindset's inside you as well. And so I think there's a huge amount of sort of personal growth that happens when you do this. And that's true of other things like passive income and extreme savings too. As we said, they are also part of the kind of mainstream cultural messages that we all get. But still, I think especially being an entrepreneur, I have found that there's a huge amount of personal growth that happens because you have to break through that conditioning.
I couldn't agree more. And I don't want to insult anyone or have anyone, get offended. Like, hey, I work, at this and I totally enjoy it and whatnot. That's fine. I think what we're talking about is people who are working dead-end jobs or people who are, brainwashed that they need a job and that they can't survive without one, and not realizing that there's alternative pathways and there's alternative thinking to just the 9-to-5 grind. If you're working in a job that you absolutely love, that's kind of like unjobbing.
Exactly. I would say then you don't have a rat race to quit because you're doing effectively unjobbing. If you love your job and if you wake up every morning and you can't wait to do it because it's what you would be doing even if they weren't paying you for it, then that's unjobbing. That's
great. Not what we're talking about. We're talking about the rat race.
Congratulations. Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about the rat race. We're talking about that feeling like, oh my God, I can't believe I've got to go to work again. I really don't want to be there. And unfortunately, a lot of people do feel that way about jobs.
I would say that's the majority of people. And it's not just, like you said, teachers and other people. A lot of parents. I know, my mom has a very entrepreneurial mind, but my dad was always like, get a job, you want a steady income, a steady paycheck. And anything that deviated from that to him was just a nightmare, fear-filled, and like I said, my mom has a very entrepreneurial mind. She always wanted to do businesses and alternative things like that. But a lot of people, luckily I had both viewpoints, but a lot of people grow up in a household where there's two parents saying, get a good job, go to college, get a good job, buy a house, get a car, XYZ. And then they're in over their head. Again, like my friend who's making $500,000 a year and couldn't feel more trapped.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can really understand how people get those messages. I didn't really have any entrepreneurs around me when I was a kid. All of the adults who I knew, my parents were employees, and other adults that I knew were employees. And so, I definitely heard those messages. And I think you're right, though, Rosie, that it's not just school, it's also in families. And sadly, I think partly it's to do with the way that even the way that kids learn about hierarchy, because unfortunately a lot of parents behave kind of like crappy bosses towards their kids,
Yeah.
They sort of treat their kids like a crappy boss would treat an employee, and it's sort of like, do this because I tell you to, and
there's no questioning, right? You
right.
say, well, what's the reason? Well, because I said so, and there's no explanation.
Right. And I mean, that sets people up for situations where someone just tells them what to do and they have to, that's life, right? You kind of got to go along with it. Of course, if parents are giving children a sense that they are independent people to be negotiated with and to have their own views and to be able to question, then it's going to be a lot easier for them to question, well, why do I want to work in this crap job? I want to go and do my own thing, So I think it's not just school, it's often to do with a deep sense of hierarchy that people get from the way that they got treated by their own parents too.
But I think that the way that our school system is, it's very, especially now, and it's getting worse. And I have a good friend who's a teacher, and she's so frustrated with teaching because she wants to teach kids to learn critically. And I don't know about Europe and the UK, but in the States, there is this push on standardized testing. And standardized testing is basically trying to measure intelligence through scoring, right? Mm-hmm. So if the kids get a certain score, they pass, they're smart, whatever. But it doesn't leave any room for critical thinking or creativity. And those are must-haves for entrepreneurs and alternative thinkers. And so I think that the way that the current school system and education system is set up, like you said, they're training employees. They're not training you to be an entrepreneur. They're not training you to think outside the box, to say, hey, this doesn't make any sense to me. And in a lot of ways, the traditional employee system doesn't make logical sense.
No. Because
how can it make sense? You're going and you're doing something that you're not enjoying for the profit or benefit of, a company for the purpose of getting income. Maybe you don't even believe in what the company's doing. So it's going against your moral fiber, which is a lot of people do because they need a paycheck. They need to pay bills.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that there's no reason why we couldn't all be entrepreneurs in just a massive load of individual contractors with linking up on projects and all doing our own thing. And in a way, it's become easier and easier over time for people to do that. And the opportunity is there. There's no reason why everyone couldn't be an entrepreneur if they wanted to. But of course, there is still a lot of that cultural dead weight of history and people not really seeing that the opportunity is there. And it is difficult to break through still in lots of circumstances. But I think everyone could be an entrepreneur if they wanted to be.
I agree. And it's also not having to be you're talking about getting out of the rat race. There's also, this isn't, a fifth option, but it's kind of an option where maybe it kind of goes in line with unjobbing and also some other things. Maybe putting some more money towards passive income to not necessarily retire early, but only work part-time.
Yeah.
That's an option too. I know a gentleman who is a professor and he is only a part-time professor, and that is by choice because he wants to spend more time with his family and his kids, and he likes teaching, but it's not a crazy passion. And so he's invested in passive income so that he can only work part-time, and it's a luxury for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great example of a sort of unjobbing approach, because part of the idea behind unjobbing is you don't care what it's going to look like on your resume. A lot of people wouldn't do things because they're worried, like, oh, I don't know, if I only work part-time, and then what's that going to look like on my resume if I want to get in? And the whole idea with unjobbing is I'm going to do what makes me happy, and I don't care what it's going to look like on my resume. I'm not on that track. I'm going to do it for myself. and I will take responsibility for the consequences in terms of finding income here and there where I need to in the future, and in living outside the sort of the mainstream in that sense. And I think that's great. If that works for people, then good for them. There are also lots of things that you can get while you're in jobs in terms of, for example, if you're thinking of being an entrepreneur, then you can potentially make a lot of really useful contacts and get to understand the inside of an industry. And, so I think there are great benefits to be had from spending some time in jobs if you know why you're there and if you're sort of feeling that you're getting good stuff out of it. So, if people enjoy the jobs that they're doing, or they also find that they're getting useful experience making good contacts, great. It's just when you get to a point where you're not enjoying it and you don't feel like it's really serving your true purpose in life, then it really is time to think again.
And also, I think it is good to be an employee just for a tiny little bit, so that when you have your business and you're the business owner,
you know what it feels like from the other side.
You kind of know what it feels like, and you don't have to be a crappy a-hole boss.
Yeah.
Say, I remember that. That wasn't fun, so I'm going to be a nice boss.
Absolutely.
So when did you decide that you wanted out? You said that you created a business and you sold out. And do you mind if I ask what age you were when you sold out and got free from the rat race?
Yeah, I was 38.
That was a couple years ago?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm 41 now.
So you're totally enjoying the past few years.
Yeah.
I'm free.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what made you think, okay, I am so done with this, I need to find a way out?
Well, I think what it was is that, so I was really passionate about my business, and I really...
Do you mind if I ask what it was?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was a pedestrian movement consultancy. So what we were doing was we were advising architects and shopping center developers and other people in the sort of built environment sector about pedestrian flows. And we built these computer simulations to show how a new design is likely to work and where people are going to walk. And so, for example, were there going to be enough pedestrians on all levels of a shopping mall, and was a new street network going to be safe, and these kinds of things. And it was all to do with pedestrian movement. And I was really, really passionate about making better designs for pedestrians and helping architects and developers to create better environments, and doing it with with these kind of science-based tools, these computer modeling tools that we developed. And I really enjoyed it, and I really found a great sense of purpose in doing it. And I just got to the point where, I imagined when I started this business that it would be a sort of 5-year project to get the business to profitability and to get it to a point where that would be like a chunk of my life to devote to this. And it was more like 7 or 8 years before, in the end, before we sold it. But I felt like that was a fantastic thing to do, but I didn't want that to be just my whole career. I didn't want that to be the thing that I did for my entire life. And I basically got to the point where I just felt like I want to do different things too. I want to take the opportunity, for example, to travel and to write and to do other things. And I could see a lot of people who I worked with in other companies and clients and so forth, who were really good at what they do, and they'd been doing it for 20 years. And after a while, even if you're really passionate about it, I think some things can just get a bit samey and just feel like, right, okay, this is another year, another project, another thing to do. And so when I started to feel like this is not so, I don't feel so passionate about it, it's not so exciting, I'm actually more interested in exploring other things, then I started to think, okay, well, what could I do to sell the business? And I'm really glad that I did before I got to the stage where, I just felt burned out and hated it. Because in the end, by the time I sold the business, I was ready to do it. And it felt like a big psychological change and to move on afterwards. So, yeah, that was sort of the process for me.
How important do you think personal development is in the process of getting financial freedom?
Huge. I think it's absolutely huge. And I think for me, one of the things that was happening all through that process is that I was taking my own personal development more and more seriously. I started off and I just threw myself into business and entrepreneurship. And And then I started to take an interest in psychology, partly really just to understand work and negotiation and sort of how to handle having employees and all that kind of stuff. So I got interested in psychology from a kind of practical work standpoint. But as I got more and more interested, I could see more and more how important it was for me, just in terms of really living as a sort of full person and having all aspects of my life, not just work. And this happens, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs, I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who focus so much on work that's all that's going on in their life. And I could see myself going down that route a bit, and I really didn't like that. And so I started to take much more of an interest in my own personal development, in thinking about, okay, what do I want from life as a whole? What do I want from my personal relationships? Which relationships do I really feel are healthy in my life? And do I feel like I have healthy relationships, or are there some relationships that I feel are not good? And so I had a kind of personal reassessment at the same time. And I think it's a huge part. If you really want to sort of negotiate and empathize with people in business, you need to have good personal skills. You need to have a good sense of yourself. But if also for your own kind of part.
I think for your own sanity.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just think, oh, I'm not into that, or I'm not I'm not into that psychology stuff, or that has nothing to do with me. And it's just, once you start down the personal development roller coaster, I mean, I'm a junkie. I'm a total junkie because you just learn more and more about yourself and the people around you and the choices that you're making. And in a way, I would say you wake up more, because a lot of times people are kind of living in a subconscious slumber.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And that's a great way of putting it. I think that's what happened to me, is that I woke up more as a more three-dimensional person, not just somebody who was kind of working on this one thing, but I also wanted to see what else I could do in life. And I think if anybody is interested in financial freedom and interested in entrepreneurship, then working on yourself and gaining more consciousness about your choices and your real needs and the kind of things that you have from your history that you maybe haven't taken the time yet to kind of process and work through, that is a massively important step if you want to succeed in terms of finding fulfillment.
I think that lack of personal development is actually a way to keep people as employees. And not that I have anything against the employee model. Like I said, if you're working in a job that you absolutely love and you feel fulfilled, that's one thing. But I'm talking about people who are working mindless jobs. If you're not understanding who you are on a deeper level, it's so easy to be trapped in an unfulfilling place in your life, whether it's relationships or a job for 20, 30 years, because you have a little voice inside you saying, hey, I don't like this, and you're shutting it down by not going deeper.
Yeah, that's totally true. I think it is true that, unfortunately, what happens then when people are in jobs that they don't like and they're not doing the kind of personal development work is that they go to the pub and they basically just kind of try and numb out what's happening for them.
Because there's a little voice inside them that's saying, hey, I don't like this. And they don't want to deal with that because it's too painful for them to say, hey, maybe this isn't the life for me. And like you said, we're living a finite life as far as we're concerned. Again, I don't know what people's religious viewpoints are, if you think there's an afterlife, but the only facts that we know 100% is that there's one life. Right? And so if you're living this life and you're numbing yourself out to stay at a 9-to-5 job you hate, I mean, you have to deal with these sort of painful things, like you said, and not just go to the pub, go to the bar, drink it away so that you can stay at this kind of mediocre level.
Yeah, and actually, I do want to say that one thing about personal development is that it's not all rosy. I mean, I found
it's definitely not all rosy.
Yeah,
it's definitely not all rosy. You have to face your fears and your demons.
Exactly, you've got to face all your demons. So, in terms of the way that I described that process, I do want to emphasize that it was also scary and painful and confusing and difficult. And deciding, that I wanted to sell the business and do other things it involved a lot, and also just reevaluating my relationships and trying to work out what I really wanted out of my life. It was all really painful, difficult stuff. So I don't want to give the impression this is all great fun and go for it.
No,
it's horrible.
personal development is hard. It's horrible. You have to deal with things about your past. You have to deal with choices that you've made. You have to take 100% full responsibility for where you are and take kind of like an inventory. You have to say, hey, how was I raised? How was the way I raised not serving me in where I am right now? It's very, very painful, people. But there is a positive, is that once you deal with these problems, or once you face these problems, the life that is ahead of you is more amazing and full and vibrant. It's kind of like the roses are redder than they've ever been, because you kind of realize, like you said, your life's purpose. You're not telling the little voice inside of yourself to shut up anymore and, downing the vodka to keep it quiet. You're actually following your dreams, which is what you've done. That's very inspirational.
Thank you. Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think that it's tough, but it is 100% worth it. And it's mind-blowing how much potential everyone has. And it's so sad to when people are in a place in their lives where they feel that they are having to numb out, because everyone's got so much potential to do things that are just wonderful and inspiring, and taking the risk of doing that personal work and living and being willing to make choices that are not mainstream, whether that's through entrepreneurship and these kind of approaches towards financial freedom, but also not mainstream in terms of personal development, because questioning your upbringing, questioning your relationships, and taking responsibility for the dark sides of things that you have kind of accumulated in yourself, that's not mainstream either, and that takes guts. But if you're willing to do that, then you discover such wonderful fulfillment on the other side that I think it's absolutely worth doing.
I want to address what you said about people having unlimited potential inside, because I know a lot of people, have grown up in a very negative environment. I know a lot of people, maybe their parents were alcoholics, or they grew up in an environment where they weren't fulfilled to their greatest potential, or even nurtured. And so a lot of people, I think, have a viewpoint that they're a burden on society or a burden on people. And I want my listeners to think about an alternative point of view, that when you are not living to your fullest potential, you're actually robbing the people in your lives of the fullest, most vibrant you. And it sounds kind of cheesy, and, maybe it sounds silly or like a positive thought kind of BS, but it's true. When you are not being 100% yourself and living to the most highest potential that you can, think about it. You're not being a full role model to your kids. You're not being a full role model to your friends and family around you. And you're kind of like taking away, the full Jake or the full Rosie, because you're not showing them who you really are. So it's not just that it's not like a selfish thing, like you're not living your fullest potential for yourself, because you affect every single person in your life. You affect your spouse, your loved one, your parents, your kids, if you have kids. Imagine what you're teaching your kids subconsciously when you're dumbing down, you're numbing out, and you're not being, the full person that you are. You're teaching your kids that it's okay to be mediocre. And so I want to put that out there, because a lot of people have an idea that they don't want to bother others, or they don't want to bug others with their ideas or their thoughts or things that they're passionate about. And it's not even that it's a bother. It's that you're actually robbing those people of seeing the full light that you are.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the terribly sad thing is that people who've had difficult childhoods, and let's face it, we've all had difficult childhoods in one way or another. Some people more extreme, and some people, have had terrible violence and horrible things, but everyone has had difficult stuff happen. And if you don't deal with it, then you're going to end up taking it out on your kids because you haven't dealt with it in yourself. And it's the sad thing is that we have to work through that stuff in order to sort of break the cycle and actually become more enlightened than the generation before us, which I think is a responsibility that we've got. Unfortunately, I think there is also the case that when you do sort of try and break through and live your potential, sometimes that is challenging and scary for people who know that they have more potential than they're living themselves. And there are some, sometimes it's painful because there are some people who are willing to see you blossom and see you kind of do more with your life and break out of the mainstream and really find more freedom. And there are some people who are going to find that such a challenge, because seeing people live more free is ultimately a immediate question for everyone who sees that, which is, why aren't I living more free too? And some people find that very scary. So, unfortunately, you may find also that it's very disruptive to some relationships, because it may challenge people and make them feel very uncomfortable. I certainly have found that in every significant transition that I've had in my life. And I guess that's just part of the process.
It is. Maybe you realize that you want to live more fully, and your spouse wants, or significant other wants to kind of remain mediocre, and your greatness kind of scares them a little bit, because they have to look at themselves and say, hey, why have I allowed this to happen in my life? And it can be a house cleaning. I've unfortunately had to let go of a lot of friends that I considered very, very negative, and they were dear friends and they didn't do anything wrong or bad, but I feel like they were not in line with, the kind of the goals or higher thinking that I wanted. They were kind of, friends that maybe you mentioned going to the pub, maybe, they were drinking friends, or they're friends who I had more of a superficial relationship with. And once I started doing personal development, I was like, I don't know if I want these people in my life. And sometimes that, hurts. You have to let go of certain people that are not, aligned with your purpose.
Yeah, that's right. It's growth. And there is relationships do end sometimes when that happens. If you have friends and, loved ones who come with you and grow themselves, who are growing too, that's wonderful. But sometimes, unfortunately, as part of the process, you have to
shed some old.
Exactly. Yeah.
Shed some old baggage. Well, we're going to wrap up. I know you said you have a new book coming out. I'd love to hear about that. Yeah,
it's called Becoming an Entrepreneur: How to Find Freedom and Fulfillment as a Business Owner. And it's coming out shortly. I've just released a beta copy to people on my to listeners who are interested. And so if people are interested, that's what's happening at the moment. And the final version will be on Amazon, I guess, in a month or so. But yeah, that's going to be coming out very soon.
Well, guys, check out his book. I'm sure it's going to be powerful and amazing and very, very positive for those of you out there who want to get out of the rat race. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. And we need more comments. If you want to leave a comment, I am doing a special promotion. If you leave a comment and message or tweet at me at Funny Rosie, I will send you some special goodies. Thank you so much for listening to Out of the Box with Rosie Tran.